Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the virtual seminar brought to you by Western Region Economic Development, known as RED, where it's our mission to be the leading advocate for sustainable growth and development in the region. This virtual event is sponsored by Montana Dakota Utilities, MDU. They're a major provider of retail natural gas electric service, servicing close to 400,000 customers within Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming. My name is Hercules Cummings, a board member and past chair for RED, and also with me and our moderator and executive officer is Ann Quandy. Today's topic is oil and gas taxes, distribution, and 2023 legislative session outlook, presented by none other than Geoff Simon, executive director of Western Dakota Energy Association, and Brent Bogar, senior consultant for AE2S. This is the topic today. We're going to cover a lot of things related to oil and gas, such as a direction impact, future expectations of the oil and gas economies, how it affects the greater Western North Dakota, and just the state of North Dakota. As a quick bio, before Western North Dakota Energy Association, Mr. Geoff Simon, he was the director for government affairs for MDU Resources, city commissioner for the city of Pierre, South Dakota, and director for South Dakota Department of Labor. Brent Bogar is a senior consultant with AE2S Nexus, also served as a past city commissioner, elected official for the city of Williston from 2007 to 2013. He's involved with tax and business policies for the Greater North Dakota Chamber. Also worked with Western Dakota Energy Association on legislation and changes to the GPT, gross production tax formula, surge bill, and Operation Prairie. So without further ado, I'd like to respectfully turn this over to our main presenters. I do want to say one thing, that unfortunately our Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford, due to last-minute scheduling conflict, is unable to attend today to give us an opening, but we'll catch him on the next one. So again, I respectfully will turn this over to our main presenters, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Hercules, and I'll share our screen here in just a moment, but appreciate the opportunity for Geoff and I to share with RED and the communities out there and others what is coming up in the session, and then give an overview on the oil and gas tax, as well as some updates in regards to tax distributions and where the oil and gas tax dollars are going. So with that, I'll kick it over, and we're going to actually have Geoff Simon will start giving a preview of what expectations are for the legislative session.
All right, can everybody see the screen? Let's hope so.
Yes.
All right. Well, again, Hercules, thanks for the invitation and the opportunity. Just to begin, for those unfamiliar with our association or may not have heard of us before, our members are cities, counties, and school districts. We don't really have anything to do with energy or energy development. We represent energy communities, cities, counties, school districts, as I said. Our board of directors consists of city, county, and school representatives, as well as two representatives from the coal producing counties. You can see that's our board composition right now, kind of all across Western North Dakota. Trudy Ruland, who's chair of the Montreal County Commission, is our current board president, and Leslie Bieber is next up. She's the superintendent Alexander. Pretty good cross section of Western North Dakota there on our board, and we've got some really very active, engaged board members. Give you an idea of what we do. Our association, obviously, lobbying is my most important function. You can count on us being at the Capitol every day of the legislative session. I'm not kidding about that. Every day we're up there testifying, commiserating with legislators on all the issues that are important to Western North Dakota. The CCCA in that second bullet there, that's the Coal Conversion Counties Association. They're sort of a subgroup of our association. We work very closely with the coal counties, spent a lot of time on coal-related legislation in the 21 session. Brent's going to mention when we get to him, we have partnered, I guess, with the North Dakota Petroleum Council on an oil and gas tax distribution study, just to kind of demonstrate, particularly to those in eastern North Dakota, where oil and gas taxes go. And you'd be surprised, I think, to see how much of the money goes into the Red River Valley. We started the Wise Roads project in 2019 to kind of improve the movement of heavy oil field truck traffic. A lot of the county road managers didn't have accurate data, so when it rained, they would shut down an entire county rather than just the area where it rained. And now we've got weather stations all over the place out there. We obviously also operate the overweight truck permit system, load pass permits for the counties, and have added a few eastern counties. I'll have a map of that coming up. And we spend a lot of time on information. We produce a newsletter every Friday that goes out to 1,800 and some people via email. A lot of good information in there. You can kind of catch up on all the energy news, both state, local, national, some international even. We also operate a website, ndenergy.org. We're active in social media, particularly Facebook and LinkedIn, and we produce a magazine twice a year, Basin Bits. Okay, let's get into the legislative session. What's new? A whole lot is the answer to that question, starting with leadership. Just chosen last Monday, Representative Mike LaFour from Dickinson was elected majority leader in the House. Mike is a super good guy, very even-tempered, level-headed guy. I'm really looking forward to his leadership. And likewise with Senator David Hogue from Minot, we kind of have another hub city there. So Western North Dakota is well represented in leadership at the top of the legislature. And the newness doesn't stop there. If you can imagine, we've got 39 new legislators. I put together a profile of all of them, and I'm not going to demonstrate it right now, but just based upon memorization, I could name all 39 of the people that you see pictured there, and a few of them obviously are part of this session right now. I would actually say there's probably 41 because we had 2 House members moved over to the Senate. Geoff Magrum from down in the Wishick area and Bob Paulson from Minot are now on the Senate side, but a lot of new faces there, and so kind of a steep learning curve for a lot of those folks, but they've been getting engaged through caucus meetings, and looking forward to meeting the rest of them. Let's get into some of the issues. Just a quick kind of a rehash of 2021. A lot of important legislation came out of the 21 session. Probably none more important than the Clean Sustainable Energy Authority, kind of geared toward, we've seen pressure from the ESG movement. And, North Dakota's energy industry is very, very much environmentally conscious. And this is just a further way to sort of embellish that. One of the members there is actually an appointment of ours. Joel Brown is on the authority. He's a Mackenzie County Commissioner. Works with Mineral Tracker. I think all of you probably are familiar with Joel and his work. The CC, as it's called, the acronym CSEA, had a budget of $250 million for loans and $25 million for grants, and they expended all of it. I mean, it's all out there on a number of different projects that they funded over the past year and a half or so. 2065 was important both for salt caverns and for potential storage of natural gas. We're still trying to figure out ways to deal with the excess natural gas that we got here in North Dakota. Salt cavern is one possibility of that. I mean, if we have salt cavern storage in the state, we could support a petrochemical industry potentially. The EERC is looking into that, and it's quite promising, the research that they're doing. We also had a straddle well agreement with the tribes, and it did not affect county revenue, but the tribes now get a share of the revenue that from wells that are off reservation that actually have laterals that go under and into the reservation. So that was some of the more important issues in 21. In 23, we're going to have some of the same issues. Additional funding for Clean Sustainable Energy Authority. One of the members in a meeting of Empower here a while back suggested they could probably use $1 billion, and I, he wasn't really joking all that much. I think realistically, they're probably going to end up with an appropriation, definitely something, somewhere in the neighborhood of what they received in the last session, about $250 million. Haven't mentioned the effort to put in a cross-state pipeline. The special session in November of 21 appropriated $150 million for a grant for, to support development of of a pipeline that would probably, start somewhere around Tioga, head over to Grand Forks and down to Fargo maybe, and deliver more Bakken gas over to the eastern part of the state. 150 million hasn't been enough to entice a company yet, but previous discussions, they've talked about going as high as 350 million. So that'll be a topic in the next session. Anti-ESG legislation, we can expect maybe a little bit of discussion about that, possibly even trying to create some kind of a loan fund locally out of maybe Bank of North Dakota assets, because the oil industry in North Dakota, as well as the coal industry, are struggling to get the capital they need for operations. ESG pressures are doing that. I think we're about to see maybe a little bit of a turnaround in that. There's a little bit more pushback coming from the states, but it'll be a topic again this coming session. I mentioned salt caverns earlier. Charlie Gorecki with EERC has described the potential salt cavern as a propane tank underground, 150 feet wide and a mile long. And that's possible because there are 70-foot coal seams down there, or not coal seams, salt layers underground in the areas they've been looking. It's really quite amazing to think that we have that much of an inland ocean here, that we got 70-foot layers of salt, but they do exist. The Supreme Court ruling on pore space a while back, it really basically said that, how should I put that? The disposal well operators, saltwater disposal well operators, more or less have to unitize when providing compensation to landowners, because the current practice or the previous practice has been that the landowner on which the well is located is the only one that's compensated. But pore space underground also has value. So adjoining landowners to disposal wells are basically going to get compensation based upon that court ruling. We'll also see an effort, I think, coming from the Petroleum Council and the industry to eliminate that $90 trigger that kicked in this year when oil prices got above $90 a barrel. Actually, it was $94.69 counting inflation. But it really, we're competing for capital already. It does send a pretty kind of a lousy signal to the industry, raising taxes on them at a time when they're kind of recovering from the downturn in COVID. They need those profits to kind of make up for what they lost the previous couple of years, and it's just not the right message to send. So there may be support among legislators for getting rid of that big trigger. Shift over to coal a little bit. We had a lot of coal related legislation I mentioned in 21 as well. There was a tax holiday given to the coal industry to kind of let them catch their breath. Again, they're subjected to these ESG pressures, and particularly competition from wind and subsidized wind and natural gas generation have been, causing a lot of these coal plants to run only about half time. And why should folks in the oil producing region worry about that? Well, I think you all know the oil industry does not run without electricity. We saw that back in April when the blizzards hit. We had probably 3/4, close to that, of the state's oil production went down when the electricity went down because of those massive spring blizzards. Reliability will be a topic. That was what Senate Bill 2313 was intended to address. They're kind of trying to basically assign a greater value to baseload generation, and that's really what the regional transmission organizations need to think about as well, because intermittent generation is just what it is. Wind and solar aren't there all the time when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. And we're seeing increasing penetration of wind and solar, and it's having a detrimental economic effect on the baseload coal plants in North Dakota, threatening reliability. And unfortunately, it's just continuing to get worse. Another ESG effect was insurance industry has not been very receptive to insuring coal industry assets. They've had price increases up to 300%. That was one of the topics talked about in the Energy Development Transmission Committee. By the way, I should mention, we've got a whole bunch of interim reports out there available on the website if you want to look into them. The EDT committee is just one that I have here. a whole lot of information in those reports. A little bit boring to read through, but a ton of information. Other, coal legislation, there were, efforts to make sure that the CO2 capture projects that are underway in the Beulah-Hazen area, Mercer County, that they're supported by legislation, and that utilities that engage in that, the investor-owned utilities that are participating in that, are allowed to recoup those costs and rates. And again, ESG was a topic here. SIB, the State Investment Board, is prevented from making any kind of a social investment unless they can somehow document that it's more valuable than what they would otherwise get under the prudent investor rule. And the Commerce Department did conduct a study on the impact of ESG and the movement on our fossil fuel industries. The one with a line through it is a bill that did not pass. The industry was not really receptive to the idea of giving communities a heads up because they don't really know when a coal plant's going to shut down. That was kind of a response to the Coal Creek station potential shutdown that, it was, being talked about, but the communities were still kind of blindsided. Coming up in 23, we're going to see more talk about reliability and the push for that because the IRA, the misnamed Inflation Reduction Act, really doubled down on incentives. I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars more for so-called green energy, wind and solar, just seemingly oblivious to the increasing threat to grid reliability that we're seeing. Not really much we can do about it at the state level, but there may be some concurrent resolutions or that sort of thing, kind of trying to send a message to the regional transmission organizations to get a little bit more serious about this. There may be an effort to put a little additional tax on the wind industry. I kind of expect to see that. Wind companies are making a whole lot of money in North Dakota. There's over 4,000 megawatts of wind right now. They're not paying a whole lot of tax right now, so we might see an effort to bump that up. Oddly, the gross production tax distribution formula, the oil taxes support the Renewable Energy Research Fund, and I think we'll see an effort if those wind taxes are increased to take that out of the gross production tax formula and make basically make the wind industry support research. Anti-ESG legislation, I mentioned that's just kind of a copy. The same stuff applies to coal as it does to oil and gas. We're going to talk about ways to end that anti-fossil fuel sort of discrimination that goes on out there. We may see legislation to try to oppose projects like Summit Carbon Solutions and some of the CO2 capture projects by amping up eminent domain laws and taking that eminent domain authority away from them. I don't think that's going to pass. There's just a whole lot of support and a whole lot of economic opportunity out there, both for the ethanol producers and for folks in the coal and electric generation business. And we may see legislation to toughen recycling and reclamation requirements on wind farms. There is a decommissioning language in law right now, but I think it could be toughened up a little bit. Education is going to be a topic, education funding. Through our association, we're working with folks in Eastern North Dakota and a few key folks in Western North Dakota. One of our new board members, Keith Harris, he's the assistant superintendent in Dickinson, has been involved with us. And we're kind of trying to put together some kind of a grant program. It really costs a whole lot more to build a school in Western North Dakota than it does in Eastern North Dakota. And the state constitution says we have to have equity in our education funding system. Well, if it costs more to build a school in the West, we need to figure out a way to address that because it's not addressed right now in the foundation aid formula. So we're kicking around the idea of pulling together language to create a grant fund out of the Common Schools Trust Fund, the original purpose of which included building schools in North Dakota way back in the 19th century, in the 1800s when we were just becoming a state. A couple of other kind of ambiguous sorts of items there. The districts in Western North Dakota aren't able to capture the best bond rating because of law that doesn't allow it because GPT revenue is deemed to be unpredictable. And we've got another statutory change there related to declaring that GPT will be part of a bond referendum payment. Right now, there's a year lag in the payments to districts, so they really can't tell the school district in their, or the patrons of the school district that we're going to, help pay for this with this GPT revenue. Just kind of a cleanup fix is really what it amounts to. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to add money for teacher salaries. That's definitely going to be an issue, especially with inflation where it's been. And obviously, career and tech and workforce issues are going to be huge again. The Career and Technical Education Board, there was money. It was basically COVID dollars directed toward CTE projects. Williston got some of that money. Watford City got some of that money. Dickinson, Minot. There are projects underway to build these CTE academies, kind of keep more of our kids here, because that's the best way to generate workforce, is to kind of grow from within. So I expect there'll be more money earmarked toward CTE in North Dakota. And we've got kind of a catch-all category. All the other major issues, property and income tax, obviously is going to be a huge topic. The governor introduced a proposal to reduce income taxes, actually to eliminate income tax for about 60% of North Dakotans. A 1.5% flat tax is what he and Tax Commissioner Brian Crouchus and a few legislators have proposed. Competing with that is a property tax reduction proposal that Senator Don Shively and others put forward. That would actually increase the amount of money in the K-12 funding formula, which, you think about it, would make it a little bit more difficult to get additional money for education, because the state is, basically putting additional dollars into it. It's really just a transfer of money. It's not any new money, but it would reduce property taxes at the local level, with the idea of which appeals to a lot of people, I think. Ballot issue reform is going to be discussed. A lot of people were pretty peeved at the Supreme Court when they overturned Al Jager's ruling that the term limit petitions were invalid. Probably none more so than Drew Wrigley, our Attorney General. So I think we will see legislation that basically makes it clear that the Secretary of State, when it comes to certifying any kind of constitutional petition or an initiated measure, has the final word. Human services, that's the largest category of state funding. A lot of behavioral health needs still left unaddressed, and there's been talk about building a new state hospital in Jamestown. That's going to be a big topic. Education policy, I think a lot of it's going to focus on remediation, because of COVID, a lot of kids fell behind. Our test scores were a little bit disappointing this past year, and it's a reflection of COVID. We didn't have kids in the classroom, and they didn't learn as well in a virtual setting. PERS is a big topic. Majority Leader Mike LaFleur has been all over that one. There's about $1 billion in unfunded liability right now in the PERS system. So there's talk of moving that from defined benefit to defined contribution. So we'll hear discussion about it. Whether it gets done, we don't know. Legacy fund, how we spend that, that's obviously going to be a big question. Economic diversification, potentially specifically targeted toward the oil producing counties, will be a topic this coming session. Transportation funding, water, wastewater infrastructure is always a topic, and of course workforce development issues, whether that's CTE or other things, are going to be talked about. So a lot of stuff to be watching in the coming session. So just to kind of give you a recap, I promised you that slide about our load pass system. We've been expanding load pass gradually. At one time, all those counties in eastern North Dakota that you see were not in it. The first county to join load pass outside of the oil producing counties was Emmons County, but since then, I think we're now up to 30 counties, Brent, I think is the total. And Valley City and the city of Dickinson and Watford City have also joined load pass. And one last slide about Wise Roads to kind of give you an idea about those weather stations we talked about, what it looked like beforehand. And if you can imagine, McKenzie County had just one weather station, and that was on the Fox Hills Golf Course before we launched this load pass project. Now we've got weather stations all over the place. The county road managers are taking advantage and using that information to improve the movement of oil field truck traffic. And I think the ag industry kind of likes it as well. We're gonna install our 49th and 50th station and then kind of call the project good. The 49th isn't in yet. It's gonna go somewhere around Mandaree. And 50, we don't know for sure yet. We might put that in coal country because that those CO2 projects in Mercer County are going to be generating a whole lot of truck traffic too. So that kind of wraps up my part. My contact information here, pretty easy. That's my only phone number, and I carry it 24/7. So I don't know if there are any questions popped up, Brent, or
Nothing in the chat, but I guess we can take a quick pause here before we jump into my side of the presentation. If there's any questions or any comments regarding, especially this upcoming legislative session, what Geoff will be working on.
I did get one comment from Dave Naring, and HB 1455 did pass, but it was an amended form. It was pretty much a hog house bill. So the original version of 1455 wasn't there, but there was a version of it that did pass. My apologies to you, Representative or former Representative Naring.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Well, I will continue on talking. The other part of the presentation today was just to give what I call oil tax overview, and it has a couple of parts to it. We're going to talk about what the taxes are, the benefits, the formulas, some forecasts, but also one of the things that I found very valuable, having been down here in Bismarck now for almost 9 years, is a little bit of an overview of the history specifically related to the gross production tax. As we have new elected leaders coming in, I think it's critical that everyone understand why we're at where we're at today with the gross production tax formula for the oil and gas producing region and where we came from, because it's very difficult at times to make a change if you don't understand where you came from, or maybe realize that where we're at today is pretty significant compared to where we were in the beginning. So start with just quickly on the two taxes for the oil and gas. We have the extraction tax. This is taxed at the wellhead. There are a number of exemptions on the exact extraction tax for the industry on different things. I won't go through all those details, but overall, the extraction tax is at 5%. Technically, it's at 6% right now. If you look at the rates here on the bottom of the slide, it was at 6.5% back in the 2015 session. The extraction tax was reduced to 5% with that trigger that Geoff mentioned, that it would increase to 6% if oil was up over a certain price point. The reason why that was reduced back in 2015, because there was a trigger on the books at that time that would have actually reduced the extraction tax to 0%. And of course, the legislature did not want to see that tax go all the way to 0. And so you can call it, in a sense, a compromise between the industry and the state, where the state eliminated the trigger that they continue to collect the tax, but they reduced the tax rate from 6.5% to 5%, and then had the trigger, if price was up, the tax would go back up to 6%. So that trigger did go into effect on June 1st. That trigger will now go off because oil has averaged under that price point for 3 months. So you can see from an industry standpoint, or any business, having a tax policy really related to a trigger where it can go up, be up for 3 months, and then the trigger comes off. It's really hard from a business standpoint to plan for that. And I would note on the extraction tax and on that trigger, that does not impact, obviously, the gross production tax or the distributions that come back to local political subdivisions, because where the extraction tax goes is primarily the constitutional funds. You get the Legacy Fund, Common Schools Trust Fund, Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund, and the Resources Trust Fund. So 70% of the extraction tax is actually to constitutional funds. The gross production tax, that is actually the initial tax that was placed on oil back in 1953, and 54 is when that went into effect, where after oil was discovered, and the state really implemented the gross production tax at the state level and took the local political subdivisions' ability to levy that a local tax on wellhead oil production and took it to the state. And there were a number of reasons for that. One of those is so that it was a equal tax across all of the oil and gas producing regions. So it kind of basically was a proactive move so that you didn't have counties competing on tax rates saying, well, we're only taxing 5%, so come drill here in our county versus this county's charging 7%, or we're only going to do 3%. And again, provided stability to an industry in regards to what that tax structure would look like. Now, the gross production tax, I always like to remind people, especially those not from the oil and gas producing region, that it is in lieu of property tax. So the gross production tax is taxed at the state level, but it's in lieu of the property tax. So the counties, cities, schools, townships cannot levy a property tax on the impacts from the oil and gas region. So that's at 5%, basically been that from the very beginning. And it does support a lot of different funds, obviously the oil and gas producing public subdivisions, but also the legacy fund, oil and gas research, state general fund, and the buckets, which I'll talk about towards the end of the presentation, where the buckets are and what they really mean. So just again, talking, this slide's really just kind of a highlight, consolidated highlight of all the things that the oil and gas tax supports. Those constitutional funds I mentioned, the legacy fund, resources trust fund, common schools, and foundation aid. The in lieu of property tax for the communities out west, specifically, especially the communities that red represents. And then those state funds, and you can see there's a number of state funds out there. I'm not going to name them all, but general fund, tax relief fund. I like to point out, I think this is always an interesting thing that our oil and gas tax and our oil and gas industry through their taxes supports not just the oil and gas research fund, but the lignite research fund and the renewable energy research. So oil and gas taxes support all of the energy research that is done in the state. Quickly, just kind of looking at those two taxes, this is a very simplistic flow chart of where the money goes, but if the extraction tax goes to those constitutional funds, the legacy resources trust, foundation aid, common school, the state fund, that goes into the oil and gas research, as well as the state funds, or what are called the buckets. And I'll talk about the buckets towards the end of the presentation. The gross production tax, this one is a very simplified chart. If I tried to fit it all on one slide, it would be about a 7-point font. So I keep it very simple at this level. But first off, 30% of the gross production tax goes to the legacy fund. And then the revenues are split with the 4/5 side and 1/5. So we've got the 4/5 side is where that gross production tax formula really comes in with the 30% local, 70% state. And that has been since really 2009 has been a battle and something that Western Dakota Energy has worked to really improve that formula. And that's what I'm going to go through here now is the history of that gross production tax formula. Looking at starting in 2011, one of the first things was increasing the caps on the gross production tax formula. So prior to 2011, there were caps, and even in 2011, there were still caps, but those caps were increased. So think about that from various communities. If you're Williston, Williams County, McKenzie County, having those caps on the gross production tax. And if you think about what that means being capped, at one point you were capped at $1 million. So think about that for the city of Williston, if instead of getting what you're getting now, if you were just receiving that $1 million. So seeing those increases in 2011 were a big thing. Now, remember again, in 2011, we weren't seeing the height of the revenues and the height of impacts yet. We were seeing impacts, don't get me wrong, believe me, I was there living through it, but that we were right in the throes of it and not sure where everything was going to go. So the 2013 session, we changed the allocations a little bit. So that 100% on the formula. So the way the formula works right now is the first $5 million of gross production tax goes to the local political subs. That was $2 million. So that was a huge increase for those local political subdivisions because now they're keeping 100% of that first 5 million. And then that's where it created the tiers. So if you're over 5 million in that gross production tax, like Williams County, McKinsey, Divide County, Montreal County, those are over 5 million counties. It created a split, and then it was a 75-25%. So anything over $5 million, 75% went to the state, 25% went to the local political subdivisions. And in 2013 is when the definition or the concept of hub cities was introduced. In 2015, that's when this was really what I call one of the big earth-shaking moments in the GPT formula. And I know it may not seem like a lot, but getting from 25% to 30% over 5 million was a huge win for the oil and gas producing regions. It was a very heavy lift because during that time, the session in the 2015 session, there were actually legislators looking at how much oil and gas tax revenue was being produced, and they actually wanted to reduce the 25% down to 20%. So getting to that 30%, which is where we're at today, that happened back in 2015. Hub city definition was changed to oil and gas related employment versus just oil and gas employment. And what that did is it also created, these were some of the political, if you want to call it, negotiations where non-oil hub cities were created. So all of this major cities in the state outside of the oil and gas producing region, Fargo, Grand Forks, Wahpeton, Jamestown, Bismarck, Mandan, etc. They then were considered hub city, and there was a distribution formula where they looked at that oil and gas related employment and they would get a distribution. 2017, it eliminated those non-oil hub cities. What happened was with price collapse in 2015, they really didn't get anything, and it was pushed to say, let's go back to the mining employment, which is what oil and gas exploration falls under from a industry code. They fall under the mining. We saw a slight change in the allocation formula with some changes in that hub cities, as well as the removal of the sunset clause on that GPT split. So in 2015, when that GPT was changed to 30%, there was actually a sunset clause that was going to have that trigger back down to 25%. That trigger or sunset clause was removed, basically saying now the formula was set. Someone would have to bring legislation to change the formula again, whereas previously with sunset in there, it was going to automatically change. And we, Western Dakota Energy, I say we because I've worked with Geoff Simon throughout these last couple of sessions to make sure that that didn't happen. And now without that sunset clause on that percentage split, we didn't have to worry about that. But there was still a sunset out there for the hub cities. And so then the 2019 session came, and that's what is Operation Prairie Dog came into play. And that provided oil for the non-oil oil tax revenues to the non-oil producing part of the state. They were part of the buckets. It did not take anything from the gross production tax distribution to the local political subdivisions. That was a key part when we worked on the language for Prairie Dog, that it was not a taking of anything from the local political subdivisions where oil and gas is produced, but it really was in the buckets. And to be honest, the intent, and Senator Wardner, who was the champion of Operation Prairie Dog, his comment was that Operation Prairie Dog within the bucket structure provided revenues to the non-oil and gas producing counties and cities. When the state was doing well, they would receive funding. So it was really kind of designed in a fashion that says if the tax revenues in the oil industry are doing really well and the state is doing well financially, we will provide benefit to the non-oil cities and counties. Hub city schools and hub cities created what was called the funding pools. This was a split within that GPT distribution to the local political subdivisions that really created a fixed dollar amount for the hub cities and the school districts within the hub city so that they had stable revenue. And that was a huge thing for the hub cities so that they could better budget and manage the debt for some of the major infrastructure projects that they took. The other thing in 2019 was the removal again of a sunset clause. I talked about the sunset clause in 17 on the distribution formula, but in 17, there was still a sunset clause on the hub cities. And so within the bill that created Operation Prairie Dog, it removed the sunset clause on the hub cities. So now the distribution formula and the definition of hub cities no longer has a sunset clause. And so the 21 session, you'll see there, that's blank when it comes to describing the history. It's because there was no battles on the GPT formula. No bills were introduced to try to change it. The Western Dakota Energy, through its members, said the formula is working for us, so there were no changes necessary in the 21 session. So as we go into the 23 session, one of the things that Geoff does is he keeps his eyes and ears open to see if anyone is talking about trying to make a change, because there's always the possibility that someone wants to sneak something in and take some money away from the local political subdivisions and change that formula. So while there isn't any major legislation proposed right now on the gross production tax formula, it's something that we track very closely on behalf of the members. So a couple of things now that I'll go through just to give you an idea of where things are at industry-wise, and what this means from a tax revenue standpoint for the state. We've got WTI price. Everyone probably on this call probably follows these numbers very well, so you see where it's going and where it's at. Right now, we're right around that $80 range again. This is back in August, last date on this chart, but depending on who you read, oil is going to continue to go down, or else oil is going to continue to go up. So we just are in a wait and see, especially coming this close to the legislative session when they look at building their revenue forecast, what numbers they will use. Average daily production, we're just over that 1.1 million barrels a day in production again. And really that's pretty stable at this point in time. This chart is back to January, February timeframe, but we're really looking at production being pretty stable in that 1.1 million barrels a day. What that means, if you combine those two charts from a tax collection standpoint, this is your extraction tax. You can see if we overlay this, if you go back and look at those previous charts, if you overlay price and production, you'll see that obviously tax revenues go down when price goes down, as well as when production goes down has an impact. And the same for the gross production tax. This next slide, I think, is the more telling slide. The cumulative is the line on this chart where we're nearing 25. And as Geoff mentioned, we're working on updating the oil and gas tax study. That's a partnership between Western Dakota Energy and the Petroleum Council. And we're actually over $26 billion in total oil and gas tax is collected by the state since the Bakken, basically. Bakken years. Yeah. This slide here, I think, is a really telling slide because you look at the amount of taxes collected. And one of the things that tax study will talk about is that over 50% of the taxes collected by the state are oil and gas tax. So the bottom color on here, it's kind of a green, at least on my screen. That's oil taxes. And you will look and you will see that the next largest tax is sales tax, then individual and corporate income tax and others. But as a general, the oil and gas tax well exceeds any other type of tax that the state collects. And the industry obviously pays sales tax and corporate income tax, and obviously their employees pay individual income tax as well. So just quickly, because we want to save some time for questions here at the end. This was the forecast for the state. Look at that and you'll see the political subdivisions, $518 million. That's to the local political subdivisions. And so you see there where that's how that all shakes out. We're well above that. We're about, I believe the last number I saw is for the biennium, we're about 43% above forecast right now. So that's a pretty significant increase for all of these funds. The last slide that I have here is the buckets. And I've mentioned the buckets a couple of times, but this is what, after the gross production tax distributions are done, after the extraction tax dollars have gone into all their constitutional funds, they flow through the buckets and fill the buckets. So the buckets are all oil and gas tax revenue. And on the left-hand side, kind of in the maroon shaded area, that's what the forecast was that just over $1 billion was going to flow into the buckets. And you've got the general fund, tax relief. And one of the things, especially for those of you that have conversations with your counterparts on the eastern side of the state, this tax relief fund, what this is used for now is to pay for county social services. So the oil and gas producing region is paying for county social services across the entire state. And when that state did that, they reduced or eliminated counties' ability to assess property tax for county social services, and that was up to 20 mills. Not all counties were assessing 20 mills, but they know those mills were eliminated. Budget stabilization fund, general fund, lignite research, disaster relief, the SIF, Strategic Investment Improvement Fund, then the prairie dog funds to the county cities. There's a prairie dog fund for airports, and then anything else goes to SIF. So that's the flow of the buckets. The first column next to that is the legislative forecast. Forecast showed that we were going to only have $24 million into the prairie dog bucket for counties and cities. Today, we're at $92 million in that prairie dog bucket. Again, because we're that far ahead of revenue forecasts. So that $24 million would have came at the end of the biennium. We're already filling the prairie dog bucket right now with over 7 months left in the biennium. Forecast wise, the final slide's a forecast that I've put together for Western Dakota Energy that shows that we'll be closer to around 470 million in that last SIF. Prairie dog, if you've read the newspapers, you'll see that, and Geoff Simon actually had a story in his newsletter over the weekend about this, that probably January, February, that prairie dog money bucket will be completely filled and distributed to the non-oil and gas cities and counties. And then it will continue to roll into SIF. So I think that's important for the people, especially on this phone call, to know where we're at and what, from the forecasting standpoint, that those non-oil and gas producing communities are benefiting from the activity that's happening out west. And that's critical, like I said, for you to know that so that you can share that with your counterparts on the eastern side of the state.
So when we go to the legislature and ask for something, those in the east should say, yeah, you bet.
Yep. So put this last slide up, my contact information as well. Feel free to email me, text me, call me if you've got any questions on that. With that, I'm going to stop sharing our screen, kick it back to Hercules. If you have anything in regards to facilitating questions, or anyone's got their hand up. I see Dave Richter's got his hand up. So Dave, if you want to go ahead and shout out the first question.
Thanks you for recognizing. Do you guys have any conversations with Senator Shively and Representative Nathy about the school buy down of property tax?
Well, yeah, I've talked to both of them. Nathy, particularly since Nathy is my representative, I live in District 30. Um, you know, I guess Representative Richter, the thing I would point out about the property tax proposal is the attitude that Governor Burgum had toward it, and I kind of alluded to it during the conversation here. Burgum is actually talking about, he points out, reducing taxes, where the property tax proposal right now is simply a shift of tax revenue, state revenue. We'd just be putting more money into the K-12 funding formula, which would obviously benefit local taxpayers. 340 million over the biennium is what that proposal suggests or estimates. I think we're probably going to see maybe some combination of the two, maybe some property tax relief, maybe some income tax relief. You know, I'd have to characterize them right now as competing proposals, but we're going to see both of them. We're going to talk about both of them. I don't know if you've heard others, David, or not.
No, that's kind of what I'm hearing too. I'm just curious as to your relationship with Nathy, as we go forward on another idea for using GPT for the counties and the school districts where it's produced, for a little added benefit for construction. I don't know if you guys have had that conversation with Mike or Don, if they're open to those sorts of things or if they're pretty close-minded about it.
Are you suggesting more GPT for schools, changing or increasing the amount that goes to schools, Dave?
I am, but just for construction,
Yeah,
not general fund dollars, just it's property tax. Property tax is used to construct buildings.
Yeah, we've had some of those conversations, and continue to try to push that in regards to, Geoff mentioned it during his legislative preview in regards to recognizing that GPT is in lieu of property tax and so should be figured into and have the potential to have a higher impact in reducing the cost to the local school district property owners by using GPT towards construction. So I think that there's those conversations, they're not completely closed-minded to. I think we're going to have to come with some numbers and a proposal to how that could look so that we can see how it fits into the K-12 funding and the state's dollars.
one thing I didn't mention during my portion of the presentation here was something that not everyone may be aware of is when a district gets in lieu of revenue, gross production tax revenue being one source of in lieu of revenue, 75% of that amount is deducted from their foundation aid payment. So for every dollar you get, you only get to keep a quarter basically. But the 2019 legislature did change that to allow 100% of that GPT to be kept at the local level if it's earmarked toward a sinking and interest fund, basically going to fund a school construction project. But we still can't count that initially toward a bond issue in the calculation that we present to the voters. And that's one of the tweaks we want to fix next session. But I think, tapping the Common Schools Trust Fund is something that needs to be considered as well, not just GPT.
Any other questions or comments?
Hey, fellas, Cal in here. Do you have any suggestions with the DOT budget of going in and supporting their budget, of course, but any recommendations on increasing their budget from some of the funds for highway infrastructure projects in North Dakota? I think you know where I'm coming from.
Yeah, funny you mentioned that, Cal, because actually tomorrow morning we have a meeting with Ron Hankey, who is the new DOT director.
Right.
We'll obviously be talking about that. Trying to accelerate the work on Highway 85 is obviously what you're talking about. I drive that road a lot, and I don't like to drive that road because it's, it's got a whole lot of truck traffic, more heavier loads than I-29, and it's only 2 lanes wide. And, so it's a problem right now. We'll definitely be talking with Mr. Hinkie about that tomorrow.
Okay, well, if you would, one of the things that the past director Panos was very adamant about was that, the environmental study all the way down to I-94 is done.
Right.
And it's just the funding that we need to work on. And of course, we're working on with the Ports of Plains Alliance with federal funding, with the new Congress and that type of thing. But I would like to hear what their thoughts are getting this thing down to 94, as long as the environmental done, because we don't want to lose that at some point. I don't know how long the life is on the environmental project, but you never know.
Yeah.
So we are going to move from Waffle City down to the north end of the bridge, and they've got things in place to go to Highway 200, but we still need to keep the focus out there. So I just think if you could get back to me on that, Geoff, I'd appreciate it.
You bet. Yeah, we definitely keep that one on the front burner, Cal.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, any other questions? You can simply just comment or raise your hand. Okay.
We got one before we let Callahan speak. I will say, Hercules, I will send you a copy of the slides so you can share those with everyone that was online.
Okay, perfect.
You're up, Callahan.
Brent, to let you know, we are going to be posting this on our YouTube channel. We did get Pat Bertinoli's posted out there and Lynn Helms. So we are working with A2S this year, and they are helping us edit our videos and posting them on our website for those who missed the call.
Sounds good.
I just want to make a couple comments, guys. First and foremost, thanks for what you do. Brent, for no one knew what you'd be able to do when you were in Williston and then going down to Bismarck and being able to really work with Senator Wardner and then the North Dakota Oil Producing Counties Executive Board, and then Geoff hiring you. Best thing that they did, changing the name and look at what you guys have done over the few years. And then kudos to the load permit, looking across the state. You guys, I remember when I sat on that board, we just had, I think, maybe 19 or 20, and now look where you are. You're growing it and it's taking off. So thanks for what you do. We appreciate everything you do.
Thanks, Ken.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions here. So we're at the tail end. It is 12:02. Just want to thank you all for joining us. We want to respect everyone's time here. We're hopeful that you found this presentation extremely valuable and beneficial. And thanks for engaging and participating. Brent and Geoff, thank you again for your time as well, assembling this presentation together and compiling the data and sharing this information. We want to thank you for the important roles that you play for North Dakota and your leadership and how you're shaping North Dakota and its communities for the better. For everyone online, if you wish to see this presentation, to share with your colleagues and organizations that might have missed this presentation, we invite you all to visit our website. It's rednd.com. That's WREDND.com. Again, that's WREDND.com. As Ann mentioned, the recording should be uploaded within 2 to 3 weeks. We do have a YouTube channel as well that you can subscribe to. Stay tuned for the other upcoming, such as the Federal Reserves, their regional economic outlook, and the Department of Commerce, Wilson State College, and Train ND. So if you're interested in staying plugged in and becoming a member, please reach out to us at RED. Lastly, we do want to thank our sponsors, MDU, Montana Dakota Utility, for their continued support. Special thanks to Ken Callahan again on behalf of MDU and representing MDU and becoming and also being an active member. MDU is the largest supplier of products and service providers delivering utility service up to close to 400,000 customers in Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming. If there's nothing else, this concludes our virtual event. You guys stay warm, Stay safe, have a blessed Thanksgiving, and we hope you join us again in the future and stay connected. So until next time, thank you.